Now, did you hear that? They was referencing Jacob and the Judamites out of the Old Testament with Cain and Joseph. Also, Abel and Leviticus. Okay, Leviticus was the cousin of Moses Claus. Okay, that's where the white people done got Santa Claus from. If you look at a picture of Moses, right next to a picture of Santa Claus, that's the white version of Moses Claus. First 5 books of the Bibles, okay? And then Doug Wilson referencing that. He said, we is the real Jacobites. And why are they out in the field with, if you're going to be in the field, maybe don't put in your shot the piece of shit family sedan Subaru over there. Like, put the field in the background and not the giant Vance refrigeration van ad right behind you. Y'all didn't know Smug Wilson? Look, I thumbed down this like 5 years ago. It's still got my thumbs down from like 5 years ago. Anyway. Yeah, Doug Wilson is a fat piece of crap if you didn't know. Somebody said, basic expert said for $5, is Doug playing the wrong note? Because if he is, it's actually the wrong note. It's actually the right note because he was predestined to play it. Boom. Exactly. Yeah, doesn't this make you want to be a Calvinist hanging out with gigantic fat gut boomers in a field with Vance refrigeration? Look at that. Did they think this was this the ad for like this guy who's in the band? I guarantee it's the drummer, right? And he's like, I've always wanted to be in a rock and roll video, but hey Doug, could we put my fork refrigeration van in the background to be like advertising? I'll pay $500 for the clay pots in the video if you put my van in the background. Fork refrigeration? Fork refrigeration. Is the guy's name Fork? I guess eating utensils is an appropriate name for people at Doug Wilson's church because, I mean, Doug Wilson looks like he's about to give birth. I mean, look at that. Whoa, dude. More like double Wilson. Look at that. Damn, dude. Doug Wilson is the size of a refrigerator. Man, look at that guy. He could play John Goodman before John Goodman was skinny. Anyway. Doesn't that make you want to be a Calvinist? There you go. Oh my gosh. You know, the exterior of a person oftentimes does indicate the interior of the person. This is something that a lot of people don't think about. Not in every case. It is possible to be a loving, humble person if you're overweight, if you're disfigured. But in a lot of cases, it's not actually the truth. In fact, physiognomy is a really good indicator of character. Why is that? Well, in the case of very portly individuals, this signifies a gluttonous tendency. I understand that some people can have, thyroid issues or whatever. But that's not always the case, and it's a sign of a lack of self-control. Now, this is something that is a little more relevant and interesting than this ridiculous, crappy music video from Doug Wilson. But there's a guy who wrote an article who was in the CREC, which is Doug Wilson's made-up denomination. So he just basically created his own denomination, which is a traditional Reformed Catholic church that can kind of be whatever you want it to be. So if you want to practice Paedo Communion, you can. If you want to be a Baptist and not baptize your infants and not practice Paedo Communion, you can. If you want to wear collars and LARP as an Anglican or a Catholic priest in the CREC, you can. Or you can dress like Billy Bob Baptist. It doesn't matter. It's a ridiculous, obvious, made-up boomer thing. But that's the Doug Wilson invented denomination, of which Doug Wilson is the Pope of the denomination. Now, there's a lot of scandals and a lot of drama over the years. You can find these articles where people have called out and complained about Doug Wilson over the last 2 decades, 3 decades, back to the early 2000s. But for whatever reason, Doug is getting a little more traction because, unfortunately, Tucker had Doug Wilson on. Tucker had Smug Wilson on, which was a huge mistake, because to prop up and push this idiot is just going to end up being for the worse. Now, the main issues I would have assumed from not kind of keeping up with Doug Wilson in the last several years was, well, he's a Calvinist, and so he's going to have this standard sort of Calvinist airs. Apparently, according to Jeff Moss, who's a former CREC pastor who converted to Orthodoxy a few years ago, Jeff sent me an essay that he wrote detailing and outlining some of the actual anti-trinitarian made-up positions that Doug Wilson has, which I didn't know. This is kind of crazy. Apparently, I don't even know if Doug Wilson knows what he means when he writes these things, but I was reading some of the paragraphs and the quotes in Jeff's article. Apparently, Doug Wilson thinks that the Father, okay, you're going to think, well, this sounds like monarchical Trinitarianism. It's not. The first thing I thought when I heard this, well, that sounds like the Orthodox view of monarchical Trinitarianism. And no. Doug Wilson thinks that the Father is authority, and the Son is obedience. You heard me right. The Father as the subject, the cause, the fount, etc., the divine subject, the Father, according to Doug Wilson, is authority. The Son is obedience. Like, in an identity sense. What? I mean, I don't know what that... I've never even heard of this. So, apparently, I don't know if Doug Wilson heard people talking about monarchical Trinitarianism and then utilized that to put it into his patriarchal Calvinist mold, and so he thought he could capitalize on the idea of the Father as the fount and the monarchia of the triad and turn it into some sort of authority subjection role, is what it sounds like. But that is not what those words mean. Okay, yeah, the Father is, in a sense, the authority. He is the source. But the Father as a person or a hypostasis is not authority. It's just bizarre. The Son is not, as a hypostasis, obedience. It's weird. And according to Jeff, but I've not looked into all of these positions. Again, I haven't even thought about this dude until he popped up on Tucker, and then I think he's on CNN more recently for Christian nationalism, which we talked about a little bit here and there. I do want to comment on that here in a sec. Let's see if we can find what Doug Wilson is talking about on CNN. I'm not going to watch the whole interview, but 30 minutes. Now, keep in mind, nobody really watches CNN except like the lowest IQ liberal boomers. That's it. Like, you got to be like really dumb to be watching, CNN, totally out of touch. So I would assume this is intended to provoke the 90 IQ boomer left that watches. And so what they do is they tailor this to rage bait their audience as if Doug Wilson is this massively influential, powerful force out there. My channel is bigger than Doug Wilson's channel. I mean, unless he's blown up since the Tucker discussion. I think my channel is still bigger than Doug Wilson. So let's see. I think they have a couple. They have Blog and Mablog and Canon Press. So let's see. So my channel is like almost 4 times bigger than Blog and Mablog. And let's see what Canon Press is at. And I'm only pointing this out because, like, this shows you that, I mean, this is not... Canon Press is 117,000. So between the two, they don't even have the audience that we have over here. But he's being pushed by now these sort of mainstream and alternative outlets. I don't know why. Perhaps because people sort of look to this guy. And when this goofy Navy SEAL guy who is so intelligent that he's debunked Bitcoin for many years. Yeah, exactly. This genius Navy SEAL who understands everything from special operations to deep theological issues, who shares the gospel with Joe Rogan, debunked Bitcoin and lost out on quite a bit of money because he's so smart. Well, Doug Wilson's been commenting on this and talking about how this amazing veteran shared the gospel with Joe Rogan. So perhaps we must call out Smug Wilson because he's now, quote, going viral. And even Ruslan is over here covering it, but like, where is the going viral part? Because, I mean, I'm not saying he's not. I'm just trying to figure out, like, where is the viral part? Because this has 27,000 views on CNN. That's pitiful, dude. So I'm not sure where the viral part is, but maybe there is some area where he's going viral. I don't know.
What makes this community here in Moscow so unique?
Oh, the other thing that CNN wanted to do, I forgot to mention, is that they want to portray this as like Doug Wilson is what Handmaid's Tale is warning about, right? So Doug Wilson's going to cause J.D. Vance to run next election and create a Christian nationalist in concentration camp America where we're all going to be put into camps, except for me because I'm a man. I'll be good. But all the women are going to be in camps and be forced to be breeders and all this stuff. Remember, all the global elite have written thousands of pages for the last 60, 70, 80, 100 years about depopulation. But no, the real threat is that they're going to make women into breeders when the Christian nationalists take over. Okay, Christian nationalism is not a real threat. I do not believe that these people are good people. These people are total scumbags. And I'm sure within this domain of the online Christian nationalist sphere, I'm sure there's feds in there. I'm not agreeing with James Lindsay, right, with the woke right and everyone's a fed and oh, you're all feds if you believe in, if you don't believe in enlightenment atheism and the Freemasonic founding of America, you must be a woke right fed. I mean, that's as ridiculous as these people. But one thing that I do know from reading and studying this domain for many, many years, alternative media as well as espionage and COINTELPRO and all these kinds of things, the first people that start calling everybody feds, they're usually the feds. Now, not always, because now we're in this situation where everybody's calling everybody a fed. So it's like, now we don't know, because who's even first? I mean, everybody's been calling everybody a fed now for a long time. And it's hard to say like exactly who is and isn't a fed. And I remember back at the time of Seville, and I was telling everybody I wouldn't waste my time going to Seville. And I was completely right, because everybody that went to Seville, many of them people had their lives ruined. So, it's the oldest trick in the book that what the establishment does is co-opt, choose, pick, infiltrate, turn people into assets. Classic example of this was when Hal Turner, the famous white in radio host, it came out that he was a Fed. And he had been for many, many years, for example, attacking Lord Voldemort. And Lord Voldemort for many, many years said that guy's got to be a Fed because he's allowed to say the craziest, wildest stuff. He doesn't get in any trouble. And it's like way beyond the pale, right? I'm not saying that anybody who says one inflammatory or wild thing, oh, you're automatically Fed. That not necessarily. But like, if you're able to consistently call for violence and this kind of stuff, then, and you don't get in any trouble on a regular basis. For example, we saw not just Hal Turner back in the day doing that. We saw that weird black dude that ran. Remember the 10 years ago, the new Black Panther Party. Remember that guy? Remember that? And then there was that other black dude that wore the glasses and was calling for like regiments of brothers. It's like, if you're able to do this on a consistent basis and you don't end up in jail, you might be a Fed. Right? I'm gonna turn it into Jeff Fedworthy over here. If you're able to call for violence on a regular basis and you don't get in trouble, you might be a Fed. Right? Jeff Fedworthy. So now everybody thinks every influencer and yapping head, or what was Jamie said they're called, face lords? All the face lords now, right? Everyone's a Fed now. Hassan Piker, right? The chat saying, is Hassan a Fed? No, iDubbbz is a Fed. Oh, Sam Hyde's a Fed. Oh, Dyer. No, I'm KGB. We all know that I'm not a Fed, dude. I'm KGB, bro. I'm a KGB sorceress. Not a sorcerer, sorceress. Hence, Ediva. Tucker's a Fed. Candace is a Fed. Lord Voldemort's a Fed. Nick's a Fed. Jay's a Fed. Everyone's a Fed. I got an idea. What if everybody applies to the FBI and the CIA and we all become Feds and then nobody's a Fed? Boom, we just beat the system, dude, from the inside out. You ever thought of that? Dude, everyone's a Fed. Sam Shamoon, oh, totally a Fed. Everybody's a Fed. The question is, who's not? Right? We got to figure out who's not a Fed now. Everybody's a Fed. Literally everyone is a Fed now. And it's kind of hard to prove that too. You know what I mean? Like, you can suspect, oh, he might be because this didn't happen or this happened and this didn't happen, and then it's like, well, if that is enough, then everyone's a Fed. Now, Fuentes did state today, which is an interesting point, that, or was it, I don't remember if it was yesterday or today, but the letter that, was it Fannie Willis wrote at the direction of Bill Barr, CIA Bill Barr, was that there's a list of people that need to be targeted, and the last three were Lord Voldemort, I forget who the other one was, and then the last one was Nick. So, that is an interesting piece of data that has come forward. But, I mean, I don't know. Who knows? Well, Doug Wilson is going to institute a Calvinist Islamic dictatorship where women lose all their rights. Because this CNN interview has 27,000 views. Like, I get more views on some of my live streams than this. So,
isn't he in Idaho?
He is.
Isn't his address? No, I'm kidding. Yeah. He's in Idaho. And in fact, I remember talking to Father George Okoro that people at his parish are becoming interested in Orthodoxy, probably because they're seeing the failure of Doug Wilson. So,
right.
Let's pray for that.
Well, actually, the Doug Wilson domain has, for 20 years now, after the Federal Vision Conference, it has been a pretty consistent conduit to people converting to Orthodoxy. I know tons of people who became Orthodox out of the Doug Wilson sphere.
Yeah.
And the reason for that, as I said, was that back in 2002 and 3, James Jordan, Doug Wilson, and Peter Leithart started reading Alexander Schmemann. And they found a lot of Schmemann's arguments for Eucharist and for Paedocommunion very appealing and convincing. But, hey, why convert to Orthodoxy when you can create your own made-up church?
Hey, Jay, can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
Hey, so I was wanting to call in because I saw you were talking about Doug Wilson and CREC and all that.
Yeah.
My close immediate family is all CREC. My dad is actually a elder in the church there.
Okay.
And so I wanted to just call and ask you, like, what you think, like, how can I talk to them about Christian nationalism? What's your opinion on that sort of thing? Like, what do you think on that? Like, what are the main defeaters for that?
Well, I mean, I have a lot of older talks on
Okay.
how the nation state should be Christian, but the problem is that you can't have a Christian nation state without a single church. So, for example, we know that God doesn't want the worship of foreign gods, entities, etc. So, if you're going to use this model of Israel as kind of the model for a Christian state or a Christian theocracy, how are you going to legislate or choose between what kinds of crazy cults and sects are allowed? For example, can a Jehovah's Witness continue to have their quote worship and their proselytization in a Christian civilization or society? I mean, if you're consistent with it, no, you can't. You have to not have anti-trinitarian groups. Okay, well, where's the line? Well, that's because there's one church. So that what they're missing is that you can't have pan-Protestantism and have a Christian theocracy. Are you going to unite with the tens of thousands of different Skittles, fake-ass Christian groups and sects out there? I mean, that's insane. It's never going to work. That's crazy. The only way to have Symphonia, which is what these idiots are looking for, which is the history of the church, is to have one church. You're not going to have Protestant Symphonia, you idiots. So it's first and foremost heresy because Doug Wilson is an anti-Trinitarian heretic, it appears. Secondly, you got to have the Orthodox faith to have a Christian government because you need the church to coronate in a coronation service the Christian ruler or emperor or king. That's the entire history of the Orthodox and the Christian church in the East. And even the Latin church, the West, had the same basic model until, I don't know, even in the Middle Ages, like the Latin church still understood, the two spheres of governance between church and state to a degree. Even the Pope was like overstepping his bounds and becoming himself the Kwisatz Haderach. They still had this same idea. So that's what the Byzantine eagle is intended to signify. It's two heads of the same body, right? Church and state working together in Symphonia. But what all of these idiots who are probably going to be baited by a bunch of feds don't understand is that it doesn't work with Calvinism and Protestantism because those are not real churches. And they're sects that don't have any authority or historicity other than a few hundred years of Calvinism and whatever, Lutheranism, whatever. It has to be the church that existed from the beginning because that church alone has the authority from Christ because it has apostolic succession. Doug Wilson has no apostolic succession. Doug Wilson has his own made-up denomination and sect. How in the world could we join together with zillions of schismatics, heretics, and crazy cult people to form a Christian? It's insane. It's idiotic. But they're right about one thing, which is that it's true that if Christians are beat down and told to be wimps and losers and weak, that the atheists, the Satanists, the secularists, the whatever, the Zionists, they will take power. You're only evil if you want power as a Christian. That's supposed to be somehow evil or something. That's not the history of the church, okay? But it's also not Joel Weebon or Smug Wilson or any of these people taking power and becoming their own cult leaders as they are without actual historical normative authority. You also don't convert the nation by converting the government. This is so dumb. I can't believe that people are so naive to fall for this or to think that, yeah, man, we'll just gather together with J.D. Vance and Doug Wilson and all the right-wing Christians and we'll create a Christian government and then we'll enact Christian laws and it'll be a new Calvinist Orthodox Tradcat Byzantium. You're just fed bait, you dummy. The only way that you have a Christian Orthodox government is when the majority of the people have converted to Orthodoxy and they want it. It's not going to work to force that top down. However, the one thing that all of these people are correct about is that somebody will exercise power. And if Christians are so stupid as to think that, and this is ultimately a Reformation heresy, okay? It's not a Tradcat heresy. This is ultimately a heresy out of the Reformation and the spread of evangelicalism and all this stuff, is to think that somehow the state is antithetical to God, as if God didn't create the state, and as if authority in the state also doesn't come from God. Okay, so when the early church converted the Roman Empire, not by force, but by 3 centuries of martyrs, the emperors became Christian eventually. And they began, after Theodosius and after Justinian, to enact Christian laws. Look up the Code of Justinian. Okay, so it took 300, 400, 500, 600 years to do that. You're not going to get that with fedtards forcing the government to be Christian nationalists with Vance and Teal or whatever. That's not going to happen. But, I mean, a lot of this, I think, also kind of dupes and appeals to, like, naive 20-year-old guys that are genuinely want to be right-wing and conservative. I was the same way, right? When I was 20, I was like, oh, yeah, I'm a Calvinist Reconstructionist. I like Doug Wilson. I used to read Doug Wilson back when I was 20. Yeah, we're going to convert America to, reform Christianity. I was a hardcore Reconstructionist back in the day. And even when I was a Calvinist Reconstructionist, reading Bonson and Van Til and Rushdoony and Doug Wilson and James Jordan and Gary North, I read all these guys. One thing that stuck out to me, I had an argument with my Calvinist pastor one day, and it illustrates the problem with this idiotic position. And that was over whether or not Jehovah's Witnesses in the Christian theocracy would be allowed to exist and do their thing. Because the Reconstructionist Calvinist pastor that I had, he argued that they would be allowed to because they named the name Jehovah. And he said if they followed with the laws of the Reconstructionist Calvinist Christian nationalist state, they could exist and have their thing. I argued, no, wait a minute, because blasphemy or teaching against the one true God is like the number one, that's pretty high up in the 10 Commandments. So why would we allow an Aryan sect, right? By that logic, Muslims would also exist in that society, right? So I realized that what that highlights is Protestantism's church relativism, right? Because of the invisible church doctrine, because, we're all actually Christians, bro. And ecumenism is ultimately a Protestant heresy, even if it was promoted and taught by the papacy originally, you could argue. It's not going to work when nobody has a shared common Christian faith. Duh. You need the same faith, the same state. That's how Byzantium was the most successful empire in world history, or at least in Western civilizational history, with the most successful currency for 1100 years, the bezant, was because they had the same faith, and they had the same emperor, and they had kings together united with the same faith. That's how it worked. It doesn't work. Look at when the Protestants arose. You had Protestant nation states with state rulers behind the various Reformation movements, except for Zwingli, right? I mean, maybe Zwingli had some degree of political power, but, in Geneva, Calvin kind of becomes a sort of theocrat. Luther has the German princes supporting him. Anyway, so that's the point, is that, when you read the first 1,000 years of Christianity, you realize that there's a close parallel between the one Orthodox Catholic faith that everyone has and the state, which is the aid and the supporter and the diakonos to that church. And so ultimately, it is the church that has the divine authority to coronate the king, the ruler, the emperor. And it does not work, obviously, when there's 20,000 different competing faiths. Obviously, that's nonsensical.